Welcome to the third part of the Finalist Theorist, which will tackle about Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics. But before that, let's have a brief review about Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. Kant's concept of what is good totally contravenes Mill's utilitarianism. Kant adheres to the philosophical belief that only good can be considered good per se or without qualification. In his work, Foundations of the Metaphysics of Morals, Kant introduced his concept of what is good by saying that nothing in the world, indeed nothing even beyond the world, can possibly be conceived which could be called good without qualification except in goodwill, intelligence, wit, judgment, and the other talents of the mind. However, they may be named or courage, resoluteness, and perseverance as qualities of temperament are doubtless in many respects goods and desirable. The foregoing qualities, however, may turn into negative and harmful characteristics when the will that employs this trait is not good itself. Goodwill corrects the mind and protects it from the repelling influences of arrogance and pride. It constitutes the prerequisite for one to be worthy of happiness. That was the idea of Immanuel Kant in his categorical imperative. Now, let's see about what Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics says. The central concept in Aristotle's ethics is virtue. Thus, his ethical theory is sometimes referred to as virtue or virtue ethics. His ethical inquiry began with an empirical investigation of what it is the human being fundamentally desires. One strength of his ideas is that they are grounded on every or very real situations covering actual activities and pursuits for men. In his investigation, Aristotle is very keen on the different ends of human beings. He observed that these ends could be classified into three: the instrumental, the final, and the supreme. He argued that there are ends that are used only as means for attaining other ends. This shows that they are not pursued for themselves or for their own sake. Rather, they are utilized as instruments for other ends that are regarded to be of greater value. In computing, the design and creation of programs are the ends or goals of computer programmers. Once a particular program is completed, however, it ceases to be an end and becomes a means towards attaining another end, that is, the completed program itself. So let's take this kind of scenario. Jean Paula is a newly graduated computer programmer. Luckily, she was able to get employment in a computer service provider. As a young professional, Jean Paula is puffed of energy and dreams. One of her fantasies is to be able to design and create a unique marketing program for a client. Jean Paula is devotedly and patiently executes her design into a program. After several months of hard work, Jean Paula finally completes the program. When tested, the marketing program is approved and is considered a big success. In this given example, the act of being able to create a program is Jean Paula's end in mind. But this becomes a means to another end, that is, the result of marketing program. There are also ends that describe as final. They are perceived as inherently good but not unconditionally final. This means that while they are pursued for their own sake, there are some circumstances when they become subservient to others. This happens when a more comprehensive end has to be taken into account. For Aristotle, the decision as to which final ends to pursue, especially in cases when not all ends can be chosen at the same time, is to be determined as the supreme end. This is the human notion of the good life. Aristotle named this happiness. He claimed that it is the reason why some final ends are embraced or abandoned. Furthermore, it is this unconditionally final end that gives purpose and direction to our lives. Hence, not only is the supreme end unconditionally final and a reason for pursuing our other ends, but it is also the reason behind our choosing among those ends whenever we must. In identifying as man's supreme end, Stephen White in Sovereign Virtues remarked that Aristotle did not really depart extensively from the ideas of earlier moral philosophers. His work knows that he took into account the views prevalent in his society during his time. He used them as the starting point of his project to advance his own moral philosophy. It is important to note, however, that Aristotle's account of happiness is quite different from the usual conception of happiness. After identifying happiness as man's highest good, Aristotle went on examining its nature. While some people would identify bodily pleasures like food, drink, and sex, among others, as the defining factors of happiness, Aristotle insisted that it should instead be understood in terms of man's distinctive function. Since man is the only being endowed with irrationality, then it follows that reason is what separates him from other beings. He is the only one who is capable of living a life of reason. This life is what is peculiar to him. And so, happiness, a man's end, should be understood in relation with man's life that utilizes that which is unique to him. And that is reason. Aristotle then argued that the life of reason is the happiest. How could this possibly apply to computing? Let's take a look at this example. There are moral or ethical issues in computing that need to be addressed. There are issues in computing because computer users from time to time go beyond the confines, the integrity, and goodness. Computing as a human action is subject to evaluation through certain norms of ethical value. As such, computing could be a means in attaining that which is desirable or good. By following the dictates of ethical norms in computing, computer users could very well seek that which is the supreme end, the good life of happiness that is not predicated on material or tangible things, as elucidated by Aristotle. Actions that do not infringe the intellectual creation of others' decency, honesty, and integrity in the use of computer and its applications, among others, are the computer user's means towards attaining the good life. Central to Aristotle's virtue ethics is the distinction he made between the two types of virtues, that is, moral virtue and the intellectual virtue. Moral virtue is also known as the virtue of character. Example is generosity and temperance, while intellectual virtue is the virtue of thought. We have wisdom, comprehension, and intelligence, of course. This consists in the performance of rational activities towards the attainment of happiness. Both of these were identified as activities not of the body but of the soul. Aristotle provided a comprehensive account of the virtue of character. His thesis revolves around the concept of moderation or temperance. This was given a clearer explanation by an elaboration on the structure of the soul and how moral virtue relates to it. Our soul is comprised of rational and irrational parts. The rational component is that which is naturally opposed to reason. The latter is further subdivided into two, the nutritive and the appetitive components. The nutritive part does not in any way share with the rational element. Among its concern are nutrition and growth. It is not in reason's nature to control these departments which share nothing in man's excellence. The appetitive component, on the other hand, includes the desiring elements, which in a sense share in rational principle. This only means that this component has a tendency to obey and listen to reason. It is reason that directs the desires and appetites to what is best. That is the mean between two extremes. As regards the mean, Aristotle put emphasis on the fact that it is the determination is never constant. Recognizing the uniqueness of each moral case, he strongly recommended that the variables surrounding it be taken into account. It is not through a particular mathematical computation that one would arrive at the mean. There are no hard and fast rules that a moral agent can follow to approach particular moral situations. The context plays a big role in its approximation. A careful response to moral situations requires discernment and sensitivity to what reason will dictate. This makes the mean state highly relative. Furthermore, Aristotle added that moral virtues can be developed through the repeated exercise of the acts mentioned. Making it a habit to strike the mean should be the goal of any moral agent aspiring to be virtuous in character. This description also gives emphasis to virtues as activities. It is not enough that the moral agent can discern what is right. This will not make any sense if not acted out. Actual performance of rational activities of the soul as manifested in virtuous act is called for it. It is in the way that moral activities over time, or it is in the way that moral virtues are required. More precisely, it is in the repeated performance of rational activities over time that the disposition that will render one virtuous is character, or virtuous in character is to be developed. Virtue then is, letter A, a state that decides, B, consisting in a mean, C, mean relative to us. D, which is defined by reference to reason. E, to reason by reference to which is intelligent person would define it. It is a mean between two vices, one of the excess and one of the deficiency. Aristotle also enumerated requisite characteristics that must describe a morally virtuous agent with doing virtuous acts. Agents who are lacking in these descriptions cannot be said to be genuinely virtuous in character. First, the agent must act in full consciousness of what he is doing. Second, he must will his action and pursue it for its own sake. And third, the act must proceed from a fixed and unchangeable disposition. Thus, for example, the computer user as an agent of morality should be in complete control of his or her actions through the use of reason. This means that he or she should be able to act in accord with that which is virtuous without succumbing to influences outside his or her will. When a computer user does something, or she does so because he or she willed it. A firm disposition is also called for in order that the agent's act would not be influenced by anything other than him or her own reason. For a more concrete example, let's have example number 2. Consider Marie who created Program X, a software whose applications could be very useful in detecting and providing an antidote for all kinds of computer viruses. Before Marie even executed the design of the program, there were already other people who were critical of it and cynical that it could be realized. However, armed with her firm disposition to realize Program X, Marie proceeded meticulously and patiently actualizing her concept. In this example, you will observe that Marie was cognizant of her acts. She willed that her plans for creating Program X be completed with her own initiative and volition, and she had a firm disposition. Aristotle also pointed out that it is not enough that human beings should act, they should also know. The latter is the concern of intellectual virtues. It consists of wisdom, intelligence, and understanding. It is through these virtues of thought that the human being is able to grasp, deliberate, and discern the first principles and the truths concerning the particulars and the universal, all of which required reason. It is the source of whatever understanding that the individual has of human nature. Every excellent decision presupposes an excellent reason. Decision is to the character, while deliberate and thought are to the intellect. Aristotle did more than just lay down general principles for the attainment of happiness. He also tried to address some relevant controversies and gave detailed accounts of specific virtues. He specifically elaborated on how the virtues will attain complete happiness through the ways by which they relate to widely valued goals such as fortune, prosperity, and honor. While some people are too quick to dismiss the possibility of exercising virtue amidst adversity and misfortune, Aristotle was firm in his belief that human virtuosity has sovereignty over fortune. Some are convinced that misfortunes will leave man helpless and incapable of transcending it. In that case, he has no other choice but to remain a victim of his hopeless faith. Man is therefore depicted as powerless under these circumstances. Consequently, one who is favored by the wheels of fortune should be the happiest. Although Aristotle did not deny the potential contribution of good fortune to the performance of virtuous activities, he rejected the idea that its absence would dramatically affect them. He even underscored the fact that it is under these unfortunate conditions that the values of the virtuous are put to the severest test. The kind of stability developed in the character of the virtuous makes it possible for them to successfully withstand the test of time. Their virtues are not easily withered by mishaps in life. Another issue is the perceived importance of prosperity in the attainment of a person's happiness. While Aristotle did not deny its importance, he also did not limit living a happy and virtuous life to possessing wealth. While it would greatly help the virtuous to accomplish more acts of excellence when he or she has more resources, the virtuous can act virtuously even with scant resources. Temperance as a virtue was relegated to the domain of bodily pleasures. Part of its tasks is to determine which kinds of pleasures are worth pursuing. A temperate person is someone who, through the use of reason, will be able to regulate his or her appetites with respect to what would preserve his or her physical well being. With this particular virtue, a computer user could very well control illicit desires that satisfy only the body. Thus, for example, he, she, or not patronize or produce pornography. Dignity was described as that which represents the pinnacle of good character, complete and sovereign virtue. It is the most deserving of honor, but does not seek it. A person of dignity will pursue what he or she thinks is best without regard for the honor of that benefits his or her station. He has no regard for external goods such as honor, wealth, power, but is concerned mainly with the best benefits that can be produced by virtuous act. Dignity is thus regarded as the virtue that is best suited for misfortune. Situations of great adversity will not dampen the spirit of a person of dignity in pursuing what is best. The sovereignty of this virtue lies in its pursuing acts for themselves, while its description as greatness of the soul finds sense in its deep-seated convictions. The concern for fairness is another important dimension of this virtue. Honor is discussed, is superior to other external goods, but it would not qualify as a virtue. In relating it to the dignity of Aristotle, Aristotle downplayed it as a motive and instead viewed it as a reward for good action done to others. In the concluding part of White's interpretation of Aristotle's ethics, he likened the rational activity of the virtuous to that of the gods and labeled it as the happiest and the best life of all. He said that the satisfaction and happiness of the virtuous is primarily drawn from the self-respect gathered from living a life of reason. This is actualized in the continued pursuit of virtuous and sovereign and the expression of the sovereign self even in the most trying of circumstances. But if our end is not exclusively external, then we attain at least one of what we want even if we die. And if we act not only to effect some change in the world but also to uphold the values that makes us who and what we are, then we realize ourselves in our action. No matter what the outcome, and we express our sovereign self in living as we wish, and as we choose right through the end, they choose what is noble ever or over everything else. Well, my dear students, that ends our discussion regarding the three finalist theorists in the person of Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, and John Stuart Mill. So stand by for another movie presentation for our next topic in line with professional ethics. Have a good day and stand by for your quizzes and assignments.